The starlight outside the observation deck flickered, like the last embers of a dying fire. From the massive viewport, Commander Lila Corbin could see the vast, dark expanse of space stretching out before them. Her fingers tightened around the key. Cold steel railing, her knuckles pale in the dim light of the Astraeus' command bridge. The ship's hull was trembling, the deep hum of the engines vibrating through the soles of her boots, as if the very vessel sensed the gravity of the situation. Shrill alarms sliced through the air, the shriek of the proximity warning system, loud enough to rattle the crew to attention. Corbin's heart skipped a beat. They had been close, too close, to something she couldn't quite explain. There was a presence. Something was out there, something that had been thought lost to the galaxy for millennia. Her eyes locked onto the view screen, which displayed nothing but a sea of blackness, peppered with distant stars. But then, there it was. A flicker. A pulse of light, like the flickering of an ancient beacon, brighter than the stars around it, unmistakable. "Commander," the communications officer's voice came through, shaking. We've confirmed it. The signal. It's coming from Earth." The room fell silent. A dozen voices choked on their words. It couldn't be possible. Earth was lost to the ages, a forgotten relic of a once great human civilization, abandoned by time and history. 1,700 years had passed since humanity had fled Earth, leaving behind nothing but fractured ruins. And for centuries, it had been presumed dead, its memory fading from the collective mind of the galaxy. But this signal, it was real, strong, impossible to ignore. "Impossible," Corbin whispered under her breath. Her heart raced in disbelief. Earth was gone. How could it be anything but some ancient echo of a forgotten time? She turned sharply to the tactical officer, her voice commanding. "Get us in." "Range now." The officer hesitated, hands hovering over the console. "Commander, the signal, it's accelerating. It's unlike anything we've seen before. It's almost like it's pulling us in." "Pulling us in?" Corbin repeated, her voice tight with the first stirrings of unease. "Explain yourself." The officer's fingers flew across the console, and the screen filled with data, graphs, and figures that made Corbin's head spin. "It's not just a signal anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's an energy spike, a gravitational anomaly. Whatever is down there, it's not what we thought. It's alive." A chill ran down her spine. "Alive?" she echoed. "How can a planet be alive?" The officer swallowed. "I don't know, Commander, but whatever it is, it's sending out signals, intelligent ones. We're dealing with something that's far beyond anything the Coalition has seen." The room was tense, every eye focused on Corbin, waiting for her next command. She took a breath, her mind racing. The Galactic Coalition had been adamant, no interference with the lost colony. And yet, here they were, staring into the unknown, with the signal of a long-dead world now pulsing at them, like a beacon in the void. What had happened to Earth? What had become of the humans who were supposed to have vanished into the annals of history? Corbin turned back to the viewport, her gaze now locked on the distant blue and green sphere of Earth. For a moment, the memory of the planet's beauty, its lush landscapes and sprawling cities, flickered through her mind. A world of endless possibility. Now it seemed a ghost, hovering on the edge of reality. But something was wrong. The atmosphere around Earth shimmered, rippling like heat waves, off the surface of a sun-baked desert. The ship's AI cut in, its synthetic voice devoid of emotion. "Commander, the gravitational anomalies are intensifying. The planet's atmosphere is destabilizing. We should—" But Corbin was already moving, her boots clicking sharply against the bridge floor as she approached the central console. "Shut it down. We're not backing off now. We've come this far. We're going in." "Commander, we're too far out to land," the tactical officer argued, his voice filled with dread. "If Earth's surface is destabilizing, if it's not just the planet, but something inside it, we may be walking into an ambush. The risks are—" "I don't need a lecture," Corbin snapped, her tone steel. "Do you think the galaxy's history has been written by those who turned away? We're going in, and we're going in now." The officer nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes, as his fingers pressed the sequence to initiate their descent. The Astraeus began to hum with the sudden intensity of the maneuver, the ship's engines shifting from their standard propulsion to the more intricate phase drive used for landing. But just as they neared the planet's upper atmosphere, another voice broke through the hum of the ship, a voice that made Corbin's stomach drop. "Commander," the comms officer shouted, "we've got incoming ships, massive ships, far beyond our sensors' range. They're closing in fast." Corbin's heart lurched. She had been expecting this, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw next. On the view screen, a series of enormous, sleek vessels appeared from the darkness, their shapes unmistakable, alien, ancient. The Orathi Corbin's breath caught. They were supposed to be extinct, wiped out in the Great War centuries ago, their empire destroyed by their own fanaticism. The Orathi were a race of conquerors, calculating, cold, and merciless. They had once ruled vast swathes of space, but they were thought to be lost. Their civilization crumbled under the weight of their own tyranny, and yet here they were, alive and coming for Earth. "Battle stations," Corbin barked, her voice cutting through the panic. "Prepare for impact. Whatever the Orathi want with Earth, we won't let them have it. This is our fight." The officer at the weapons console was already moving, eyes wide with the realization that the Astraeus stood little chance against the Orathi fleet. Their ships were enormous, city-sized, with defensive shields capable of withstanding anything the Coalition could throw at them. The ship's weapons, powerful as they were, would barely make a dent. But Corbin wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Not when Earth was so close. Not when she could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She turned to her crew, steeling herself. "We fight for Earth's future, and for the survival of every human who ever lived. Get us in position to defend the planet. We're not just here to investigate, we're here to protect." And with that, the Astraeus shuddered as it accelerated, plummeting toward the planet's surface, ready for the battle that would determine the fate of humanity's lost colony and the future of the galaxy itself. The Astraeus descended into the turbulent atmosphere of Earth, its hull vibrating under the strain of re-entry. A series of violent shakes rattled through the ship as the exterior heat shields began to glow a blistering orange, protecting them from the unrelenting friction of their high-speed descent. The air itself seemed to rebel against the intrusion, crackling with static energy that made the ship groan and shudder with each passing second. Corbin gripped the armrest of her seat, teeth clenched, as the control systems fought to maintain stability. They were cutting through a storm not of clouds, but of invisible, turbulent forces, energy fields that should not have been. "There, Commander," the chief engineer's voice broke through, filled with urgency. "The ship's systems are under stress. The atmospheric interference is unlike anything we've ever encountered. If this continues, we may lose the power grid." "Before we reach the surface," Corbin's eyes darted to the readouts. Despite the flashes of warnings across the display, the ship's phase drive system was holding, just barely. The gravitational anomalies the tactical officer had warned them about were now becoming more pronounced. The planet wasn't just emitting strange signals. It was warping the very fabric of space-time around it, distorting the normal laws of physics. "How much longer until we're in range?" Corbin demanded, voice steady, though inside the anxiety was gnawing at her. "Less than 10 minutes, Commander," the officer replied. "We'll have a direct line to the surface by then, but there's no telling what we'll find down there." The planet was drawing them in, pulling them closer. The further they descended, the more unnatural the atmosphere felt. There were no clouds in sight, no signs of life, at least not in the way they were familiar with. Earth should have been a lush world, teeming with wildlife and cities stretching across continents. But this was something else. The landscape below them was wrong. The oceans shimmered with an eerie, unnatural glow. The forests, where they could make out the shapes of vast, towering trees, seemed oddly geometric, as if they had been shaped by an intelligent hand. And then there was the surface itself, a network of scars, deep fissures that crisscrossed the land, like the veins of some colossal, dying creature. "We're crossing the outer barrier of the Earth's atmosphere," the pilot's voice interrupted. "Brace for impact." The Astraeus shuddered violently as the air grew denser. Energy spikes surged through the ship, the engines groaning under the stress. Despite the high-tech stabilizers, the ship's controls seemed to glitch for a split second, just long enough to send a ripple of panic through the crew. In that moment, every officer on the bridge knew they were on the edge of the unknown. No one had been to Earth in over a millennium. No one knew what awaited them down there. The view screen flickered for a moment before it stabilized. What they saw next made every officer gasp. A massive, spiraling cityscape stretched out before them, sprawling across what appeared to be a vast, dead continent. Towering spires of dark metal twisted upwards, reaching for the sky. The architecture was nothing like the grand structures Corbin had seen in the Coalition's archives. These structures were alien, not in the sense of alien species, but alien in the sense of a mind that thought and built differently. Smooth, organic curves flowed into jagged edges, creating a city that looked like it had grown from the Earth itself rather than being constructed. "Is that a city?" one of the officers murmured. "No," Corbin replied softly. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the full expanse of the structure. "It's a weapon. Or it was once. This doesn't look like a civilization. It looks like something was built to contain power. Something powerful enough to have changed the course of history." Her words lingered in the air, but the realization hit hard. They were not the first to set foot here. Something or someone had been here long before they arrived. As the Astraeus descended further, the energy readings began to spike once again. There was something in the atmosphere, some kind of charge in the air that made it feel alive, like the planet itself was sentient. Corbin's instincts screamed at her. Whatever had happened here, whatever had been left behind, had the potential to either save them or destroy them all. "Prepare for landing," Corbin ordered, as the ship's landing gear extended, claws scraping, the air with an eerie hiss. "Everyone stay sharp, we don't know what's waiting for us down there." The ship touched down with a heavy thud, sending a jolt through the entire vessel. For a moment, there was only the quiet hum of the ship's systems, the soft whispers of a crew bracing themselves for the unknown. "Commander," the security officer spoke up, his voice low and tense. "We've got a new signal coming from within the city. It's not human. It's not any language I've ever seen. And it's emanating from the central tower." Corbin's stomach churned. There was something about that signal, its frequency, its rhythm, that didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just alien in origin, it felt like it was waiting for them. As if the city, the planet, had been expecting them to arrive. She tapped her comms, sending out the order. "All teams, suit up. We're going in. But remember, this isn't just a recon mission. We don't know what we're walking into. Stay in formation and stay alert." With the landing ramp lowering, the cool, dry air of Earth rushed in. It wasn't the fresh, rich atmosphere Corbin had imagined. Instead, it smelled faintly of ozone and burnt metal. The landscape beyond was eerily silent, the distant spires of the city casting long, strange shadows across the barren land. The ground beneath them was cracked, crumbling, as if the surface of Earth itself had been slowly dying for centuries. And yet life, of some kind, persisted. The twisted, geometric trees they had seen from orbit stood like sentinels in the windless air, their bark dark and gleaming, almost metallic in appearance. There were no animals, no birds, no sounds of life. The only movement was the unsettling sway of the trees, as if something unseen was shifting the air itself. Corbin led the way down the ramp, her boots crunching against the dry, brittle earth. The rest of the crew followed, their eyes wide as they took in the alien landscape. Each footstep felt like a declaration, a silent acknowledgement that they had crossed into a world that wasn't their own. The mission had taken a turn from a simple exploration to something much darker. "Commander," the security officer called, his voice edged with caution. "We are not alone. There's movement at the base of the central tower." Corbin's pulse quickened, but she didn't hesitate. "Move out," she commanded, her voice hard as steel. "We're here for answers." And as they moved forward, Corbin couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just uncovering the fate of Earth. They were walking into the jaws of a long-forgotten nightmare, a nightmare that had been waiting for them. The team moved cautiously, the metallic grind of their boots against the cracked ground, the only sound in the eerily silent air. The towering city loomed ahead, its spires twisting upwards like the skeletal remains of some giant beast. The central tower, where the strange signal was originating from, stood in the distance, dominating the skyline. Its jagged edges and shimmering surface seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, almost as if it were alive. Corbin's senses were on high alert, her every instinct telling her that this was a place of power, a place that had been abandoned for reasons no one yet understood. "Stay sharp," Corbin murmured, glancing back over her shoulder at the rest of her crew. "We don't know what we're walking into." Her voice was steady, but inside she was a whirlwind of thoughts. The signal was growing stronger, more insistent, urging them forward, and the closer they got to the tower, the more unnerving it became. The air itself felt charged, thick with static, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. There was something otherworldly about the energy emanating from the tower, something ancient, as if this place had been waiting for them. "Commander," the communications officer's voice crackled through her earpiece, his tone tight with tension. "I'm picking up readings. Something in the tower is active. I don't know what it is, but it's not just a beacon. It's a signal, but it's also sending out some sort of transmission. It's almost like it's communicating with us." Corbin's brow furrowed. "Communicating? With us?" "Yes, Commander. I can't make sense of it yet, but it feels like it's trying to reach us." His voice trailed off, unsure, but there was a sharp edge to it now, a growing sense of urgency. "Understood," Corbin replied, her voice unwavering. "Keep working on it, but don't let it distract you." We move forward. The team continued, their path leading them through the twisted streets of the lost city. The architecture was unlike anything they had ever seen. The buildings weren't made of stone, metal, or any other material they were familiar with. Instead, they seemed to be constructed from a combination of living organisms, biotechnological alloys, and some unknown material that glowed faintly under the dim light. At first glance, it looked like the city had simply been abandoned and left to decay. But as they got closer, the subtle signs of life became more apparent. Some of the structures seemed to pulse, like a heart beating, while others emitted a soft humming vibration, resonating with the rhythm of the planet's strange energy. "I've never seen anything like this," one of the engineers muttered, looking up at the buildings in awe. "It's as if the city was alive at one point, like it grew here instead of being built." Corbin nodded. It was what she had been thinking too. This city had not been made by hands, at least not in the conventional sense. The power that had constructed it, that had powered it for centuries, was beyond anything humanity had ever known. They had been walking through the bones of a civilization that had harnessed the very forces of nature, perhaps even something more. As they neared the central tower, the temperature began to drop. The air thickened, and the light around them seemed to warp, as if the very atmosphere was distorting. The crew's breath fogged in the air, a stark contrast to the heat they had experienced earlier. The cold was unnatural, biting, as if the tower itself was drawing the warmth out of the world around it. "We're almost there," Corbin said, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Keep your eyes open. There's something here, something that doesn't want us to get any closer." A low rumble echoed through the ground, a distant tremor that seemed to reverberate in the very core of the planet. It was subtle at first, like the beginning of a storm, but it grew steadily, becoming more pronounced with each step they took. The team exchanged wary glances, each person keenly aware of the growing sense of danger. "Commander, we're detecting movement," the security officer said, his voice tight with anxiety. "In the tower. Inside. Something is coming." Corbin's hand instinctively went to her weapon as she stopped in her tracks, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The tower loomed before them, dark and imposing. The strange energy emanating from it had intensified, its glow pulsing in time with the irregular beats of the tremors beneath their feet. Then, as if on cue, the ground shook violently, and the sky above them seemed to darken. The entire city seemed to groan, a sound that resonated deep within their bones. A moment later, a deafening roar echoed through the empty streets, reverberating off the tall spires, coming from the depths of the central tower. The sound was like the roar of a dying animal, something ancient struggling to survive. "Move!" Corbin ordered, her voice sharp as the crew broke into a sprint toward the tower. They could no longer afford to wait. Whatever was inside was coming, and it wasn't going to be friendly. They reached the base of the tower where the entrance loomed, an enormous arching doorway framed by alien runes that glowed with a sickly green light. As they approached, the doorway slid open with an eerie hiss, as if it had been waiting for them. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped even further, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The interior of the tower was vast, far larger than any structure they had encountered before. It was a hollow cavern, filled with spiraling walls and floating platforms that drifted lazily in the air, defying the laws of gravity. In the center of the chamber, a massive spherical device hovered, suspended in the air by some unknown force. It was covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and change, as if they were alive, as if the very structure of the device was communicating with them. "Is that the source of the signal?" one of the engineers whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes," Corbin said softly. "But it's more than that. It's a weapon, a machine of unimaginable power, and it's been waiting for us." Suddenly the ground trembled again, but this time it wasn't just the tower, it was the entire planet. The spherical device began to glow brighter, and the air around them hummed with a low, vibrating energy. The walls of the tower seemed to close in, the runes flashing in rapid succession. "This isn't just a message," Corbin realized, her heart racing. "It's a warning, and we've just triggered it." Before she could give another order, the sphere exploded with an overwhelming burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the chamber that knocked the team off their feet. Corbin fought to stay upright, her vision blurring. The world seemed to shudder. The walls of the tower began to warp and twist, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. And then, there was a voice. A voice that didn't belong to any of them. A voice that echoed in their minds, not in their ears. It was deep, ancient, and impossibly cold. "You should not have come here," the voice intoned. "Now you will pay the price." The energy pulsed, and the tower began to collapse. The shockwave from the explosion slammed into Corbin and her team, throwing them backward like ragdolls. The world spun in a violent blur, the air charged with a crackling intensity that made it nearly impossible to breathe. She fought to keep her footing, her heart pounding in her chest, as she struggled to focus through the disorienting chaos. The voice, cold and ancient, still echoed in her mind, its words like a curse that refused to fade. "You should not have come here. Now you will pay the price." Corbin's senses snapped back into focus as the walls of the tower began to distort, the air humming with energy. She pushed herself up, hands gripping the jagged edges of a shattered pillar to steady herself. Her team was in disarray, some still on the ground, others scrambling to regain their bearings. The central sphere, the device, had expanded, its pulse growing stronger with every passing second, and its energy was beginning to tear the very fabric of the tower apart. "Move! Get to the exit," Corbin shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Now!" The ground trembled again, sending shards of stone and glowing fragments of the tower's alien technology cascading around them. A large chunk of the ceiling overhead crumbled and fell, narrowly missing the team. The sound of twisting metal and groaning stone filled the air, a cacophony of destruction as the structure around them buckled under the strain. "We can't get out that way," one of the engineers screamed, pointing to the massive doorway they had entered through. It was already half collapsed, the entrance blocked by fallen debris, the dust thickening the air like a suffocating fog. Corbin's mind raced. The only way out was up, into the heart of the tower itself. "This way," she yelled, leading the team toward a series of narrow, winding staircases that spiraled upward along the walls. There was no time to waste. The tower was collapsing around them, but something within that sphere had triggered this madness. She couldn't leave without understanding what it was. As they scrambled upwards, the humming of the sphere grew louder, more intense. The entire structure of the tower seemed to be alive, vibrating with the pulsating energy emanating from the device. The walls buckled as they ascended, and they had to duck and dodge as huge sections of the ceiling cracked and fell, narrowly, missing them. Every step felt like a race against time as the tower began to fold in on itself, its once sturdy framework giving way to the relentless force of whatever had awakened within it. The team reached a plateau halfway up the tower, a narrow landing that overlooked a vast chasm of cascading light. The sphere in the center now loomed directly above them, pulsating with an intensity that threatened to consume everything in its wake. "I don't know how much longer we can hold out," the security officer shouted, his voice strained. "Whatever this is, it's destabilizing the whole tower. If we don't find a way to shut it down, we'll be crushed when it collapses completely." Corbin nodded, her gaze locked onto the sphere. "We're not leaving until we understand what this is," she said, her voice steely with resolve, "whatever it takes." As she looked up, she saw the terrifying truth. The sphere wasn't just pulsing with energy, it was growing. The symbols covering its surface had shifted, their glowing edges now stretching outward in intricate patterns, as if they were alive. It was as if the sphere itself had a mind, a consciousness, and it was actively altering its own structure, evolving into something more dangerous with each passing moment. A deep rumble filled the tower as a crack split the sphere's surface, and from within a dark, swirling vortex began to emerge. A chill swept through the air, freezing the very atmosphere. The vortex was a swirling mass of black energy, writhing and coiling like some unnatural storm. The smell of ozone and burning metal filled the air, mixing with the distinct taste of fear in Corbin's mouth. She had no idea what this force was, but it was clear that it was not only destroying the tower, it was warping the very reality around them. And then, with a violent crack, the vortex exploded outward, and something else emerged from within the sphere. Corbin's breath caught in her throat as she stared up in horror. A creature, vast and incomprehensible, slowly began to materialize from the dark rift. Its form was intangible at first, just a shifting mass of energy. But as it solidified, it revealed its true shape, a towering figure, humanoid in appearance, but impossibly tall, easily 20 feet, with long, writhing tendrils that seemed to be composed of pure darkness. Its body was covered in black, iridescent scales that shimmered with the same eerie, unnatural glow that the tower had exuded. Its face was a terrifying void, with two glowing eyes that seemed to burn with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. This wasn't just a creature, it was something older, something far more ancient than anything Corbin had ever encountered. It was an entity forged in the depths of this dying world, a being that had likely been slumbering for centuries, waiting for this exact moment. It let out a low, guttural roar, an unearthly sound that shook the very foundations of the tower. The ground cracked beneath their feet, and the team staggered backward in shock. There was no way they could face this thing directly, no way they could survive its wrath. "Commander!" the tactical officer screamed, pointing toward the vortex. It's controlling the energy, it's pulling us in." Corbin's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The creature wasn't just there to destroy them, it was feeding on the planet's energy, drawing everything it could into the rift, feeding its own power. And it was doing it with terrifying precision. "Retreat!" Corbin shouted, but it was already too late. The creature's tendrils lashed out, crashing against the walls, sending shockwaves through the tower. One of the crew members was thrown across, the room slamming into the stone with a sickening thud. His armor cracked, and his helmet shattered on impact. He didn't move. The team moved as one, trying to fall back, but the tower was no longer just a place. It was a trap, a labyrinth. That was closing in on them. The very ground was turning against them, the walls warping, bending inward as the creature's power began to take hold of the structure. "Commander," the communications officer gasped, his voice trembling. It's not just a weapon, it's a prison. This thing was locked away, and now it's free." Corbin's blood ran cold. The implications of what he said hit her with the force of a ton of bricks. Earth hadn't just been abandoned, Earth had been sealed off. This creature, this abomination, had been imprisoned for a reason, and that reason was about to be unleashed on the galaxy. "Get to the ship," Corbin ordered, her voice a sharp command, as she turned to lead the team back toward the entrance. The ground continued to tremble beneath their feet, and the tower seemed to be collapsing in slow motion, each moment drawing them closer to a cataclysmic end. But Corbin wasn't going to let that happen. Not yet. Not until she knew how to stop it. They had to make it out, alive and with answers. But as the team scrambled to make their way toward the exit, a chilling thought gripped her heart. Earth wasn't just lost. Earth had become the birthplace of a new nightmare. A nightmare that had been waiting to tear the galaxy apart. Corbin's heart pounded in her chest as she led the team through the collapsing tower. The walls around them groaned, cracking open like the ribs of a dying beast. Each tremor sent shivers through the ground, rattling their bones as the creature, the prisoned entity, unleashed its power, warping the very fabric of reality. Their mission had shifted from discovery to survival. The towering structure wasn't just falling apart, it was being rewritten, reshaped by the immense alien force that had just been freed. The path ahead was a labyrinth of crumbling walls and shifting passageways, but there was no choice but to keep moving. "Faster!" Corbin barked, eyes scanning the darkened corridors. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and scorched metal, and the heat was oppressive. Whatever energy the creature was siphoning from the planet, it was turning this place into a furnace. The heat wasn't just physical. It was as if the planet's very essence was boiling beneath their feet, pushing them forward with relentless urgency. Behind them, the distant sound of an otherworldly shriek echoed, a deafening wail that made the air vibrate. The creature was close. It was hunting them. It was drawing nearer, its tendrils slithering through the collapsed structure like serpents in pursuit of their prey. Corbin didn't look back. There was no time to look back. The team needed to make it out, alive, and there was only one way left: the ship. The escape craft, the salvager, was their only hope of getting off this cursed world, and it was waiting for them just beyond the city limits. A low hiss echoed from a nearby corridor. "Commander," one of the security officers shouted. "I think we've got a way out." Corbin turned toward the voice, heart leaping in her chest. They had reached a crossroads in the tower, a series of narrow hallways that led to the planet's surface. Through the dust and debris, she could see a narrow bridge leading out into the open air. It was an emergency escape route, one that was meant to lead to the surface, directly to the salvage bay where the salvager was docked. "Move!" Corbin ordered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of destruction behind them. The bridge was their last hope. If the creature reached them before they made it to the surface, it would be over. They ran, their boots echoing in the claustrophobic space, their breath ragged and urgent. But as they neared the bridge, the temperature dropped suddenly. The air turned bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seemed to bite into the skin, as though the universe itself were trying to freeze them in place. Corbin's breath clouded in the air, her exhale visible in the unnatural chill. The bridge itself, which had once seemed like a sanctuary, was now a death trap. The surface shimmered with an ethereal glow, and dark tendrils, thick and impossibly long, emerged from the sides, curling and twisting like living shadows. The bridge was no longer just a means of escape. It was an extension of the creature's will. It was a part of the growing nightmare. "We need to get across now," Corbin shouted, pushing forward despite the growing sense of doom that gnawed at her. They sprinted across the bridge, but every step was a struggle. The tendrils lashed out, trying to ensnare them, trying to pull them into the abyss below. Corbin could see the creature's form shifting in the shadows, its glowing eyes locked on them, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was closing in, and the energy swirling around it was only growing stronger. The first of the tendrils shot out like lightning, grabbing hold of one of the engineers, yanking him backward into the void. His screams were cut short as the darkness consumed him, swallowing him whole. The remaining crew members screamed in terror, but there was no time to mourn. They had to keep moving. "Don't stop! Keep running!" Corbin shouted, her voice hoarse from the heat and exertion. The bridge was narrowing ahead, the exit almost within reach. The salvager was only a few hundred meters away, nestled in the rocky crevice of the city's last intact spaceport. It was their only ticket out, and the team needed to reach it before they were overwhelmed by the creature. Corbin's pulse thundered in her ears as they reached the final stretch, but just as they were almost there, the last of the bridge collapsed. Beneath them, one of the engineers fell, grabbing at the edge, his fingers barely holding on. His cries echoed into the abyss as he slipped into the darkness below. "Go!" Corbin shouted at the remaining crew. "I'll hold them off!" But the remaining crew hesitated. Their faces were grim, fear written into their eyes. There was no way they could leave her behind, not now. "Corbin, no!" one of the security officers shouted, reaching out to grab her arm. "Just go!" she screamed back, a harsh order that cut through their hesitation like a knife. "Get to the ship!" The team hesitated for only a moment more before running. Ahead, the remaining few leaping over the gap in the bridge and making their way to the waiting ship. Corbin didn't look back. She couldn't. The creature was close. Too close. It was right on the bridge now, its tendrils writhing like serpents. In the shadows, its dark eyes locked onto her like a predator waiting for the kill. Corbin pulled out a small compact detonator from her belt, a last-ditch effort to slow the creature down, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. She pressed the button, and the remaining bridge section behind her exploded, sending a burst of heat and light into the air. The shockwave reverberated through the tower, sending cracks and fissures racing through the structure. For a moment, the creature recoiled, the explosion disrupting its focus. It howled in fury, a sound so deafening that it made the very air tremble. The tower shook violently as if in response, but Corbin didn't wait to see if the explosion had done any real damage. She sprinted the final stretch toward the surface, leaping across the gap where the bridge had collapsed, barely landing on solid ground. Her legs buckled as she landed, but she pushed herself up, stumbling toward the waiting salvager. As the ship's ramp lowered, the crew scrambled inside, and Corbin followed them, slamming the hatch shut behind her. The salvager's engines roared to life, and the ship lurched upward into the sky, breaking free from the collapsing structure below. They made it. But Corbin couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before the creature found them again. The salvager blasted through the atmosphere, tearing its way into the vast expanse of space, leaving the shattered ruins of the tower and the dying planet behind. Corbin leaned against the ship's console, staring out the forward viewport. Her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, her body battered and bruised, but there was no time for rest. They had survived, but the nightmare was far from over. The creature, the ancient entity, had been freed. That much was undeniable. And it wasn't just a threat to them. It was a threat to the entire galaxy. Whatever it was, it had been locked away for a reason. The crew had inadvertently awakened something so old, so powerful, that the consequences were beyond comprehension. The darkness they'd seen in the tower wasn't just a weapon. It was a force of nature, a force of destruction that had been bound by a civilization long lost to the ravages of time. Corbin exhaled sharply, her breath catching in her chest as she looked around at the remaining members of the team. They were all gathered in the cramped control room, their faces pale, eyes wide with shock and fear. None of them had expected this. None of them had expected to find what they had found. They thought they were exploring ancient ruins, artifacts of an extinct species, a piece of human history long buried and forgotten. But what they had uncovered wasn't just history. It was a catalyst, a harbinger of doom. "Commander," one of the engineers said, his voice shaky, "we need to make a decision. The distress signal we received from Earth, do we still follow it?" Corbin's gaze flicked to the holomap, where Earth's location blinked on the screen. A faint signal flickering from the planet's surface, a weak call for help, one that had drawn them here in the first place. It had been a faint signal, a mystery, something that had been dormant for centuries until now. Now, with the creature freed, Corbin knew it wasn't just Earth that needed saving. The galaxy itself was in peril. "We follow it," Corbin said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "We have to. That signal admits our only chance at understanding what's really happening here. If Earth is still standing after all this time, there's a reason. We need to find out what that reason is, before the creature does." As the salvager accelerated, breaking through the bounds of the system, Corbin's mind was already racing ahead. The galaxy was vast, billions of stars, countless planets, and untold civilizations. But she knew that if this entity wasn't stopped, none of it would matter. She had seen what it could do, the way it manipulated energy, how it could tear through the very fabric of space itself. It was as if it didn't just exist in the physical realm, it existed between the threads of reality, bending and warping everything it touched, and if it reached Earth, if it found its way there would be no stopping it. "Commander," the ship's AI interrupted, its voice calm but tinged with urgency. "We've detected another anomaly, another signal. It's coming from the outer rim. The coordinates are consistent with ancient human settlements. We should investigate." Corbin's breath caught in her throat. Another signal. The AI's words echoed through her mind like a warning bell. Ancient human settlements. There were rumors, stories passed down by those who had ventured into the outer reaches of the galaxy, that human colonies had been abandoned long ago, before the great exodus to other stars. But no one had ever been able to confirm the rumors. Some thought the colonies were lost to time. Others believed they had been wiped out by hostile alien forces. But now, with this new signal, Corbin wondered if the truth was far darker than anyone could have imagined. "We'll investigate," Corbin replied, her voice sharp and commanding. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but no one argued. They all knew that the stakes had just been raised higher than any of them could have anticipated. As the salvager adjusted course toward the new signal, Corbin stood up, her gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. The weight of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. The galaxy wasn't just at war, it was unraveling. The dark entity they had awoken wasn't just some rogue weapon or forgotten terror. It was something far older, far more insidious, and it had been locked away for a reason, but now it was free. And with each passing moment, the universe was slipping further into chaos. The ship's engines hummed steadily as they broke through the edge of the system and into the uncharted depths of space. As Corbin watched the stars streak by, a cold realization settled over her. They had no idea what lay ahead. No idea what awaited them on the edge of the galaxy, or what horrors might rise from the darkness of the outer rim. But one thing was certain: the return of Earth's lost colony was only the beginning. The creature they had unleashed was only the beginning, and Corbin knew that if they didn't stop it, the galaxy as they knew it would soon be nothing more than a memory, a hollow echo of a dying universe. She turned to face her crew, her eyes hardening with determination. "We're going to stop it, whatever it takes, and we're going to find out what really happened to Earth, no matter the cost." As the ship sped toward the unknown, the stars growing more distant with every passing second, Corbin's thoughts lingered on the mysteries they had uncovered, and the even greater mysteries still to come. The universe would never be the same, and neither would they. Thank you for joining us on this epic journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. What do you think will happen when they finally reach the lost colony? Share your theories and let's continue this adventure together.